right? So there's a lot of people, particularly as it relates to getting jacked, who worry about the consequences of cardio to that. And I also think you have some interesting stuff to talk about the actual benefits of the concurrence of those things. So tell us a little bit about that misconception and how you view cardio in the context of building muscle.
Very interesting point here. I would like to say that a lot of people that have a fear of doing cardio because it has conflict with their muscle gains tend to also idolize an athlete of some sort. And if you look at a lot of people in the NFL or the NBA or the NHL or whatever, or gymnasts in the Olympics, like they all do cardiovascular activities and they all lift weights and they all look great. And so the idea that this has some sort of attenuating effect on muscle growth, I think confuses what happens in real life. So from a cell signaling standpoint, does it? I think so. That it, acutely it impairs muscle growth, and to which I reply, so what? If you lift weights for 10 years, you'll end up maxing out anyway. And so then do you sacrifice anything practical by doing cardiovascular activity? Well, only if you do so much that it affects your ability to lift weights properly. And to that, we have an entire field of study to manage that sort of thing, which we call strength and conditioning. So an entire field of study dedicated to people running and doing strong things at the same time. And so the idea that we have an entire field of study devoted to doing cardio and lifting weights in the same training program, and a whole group of people that feel scared of it, I find interesting. We have so many resources available. So if you have that sort of belief, where I define belief as behaving as if it is the case, that doing cardiovascular activity will impair your muscle growth, what if you said, so what? And then look at the people that maybe you look up to, that you aspire to as far as, they developed bodies that you find impressive, and you might feel surprised at maybe the amount of cardiovascular activity they do and have always done. Now, just taking that aside, that like a lot of large, muscular, impressive people do lots of cardiovascular activity, because look at most professional athletes, that when done properly, in my opinion, can enhance lifting weights, for instance, by giving you a greater training density. In other words, you can do more work in less time. From a practical application standpoint, if you do cardiovascular activity, you can do the same amount of work lifting weights in a shorter period of time. That may end up canceling itself out with the addition of health benefits, either metabolically or otherwise. So you also have practical benefits, like if you got to hop over a fence to get away from the fuzz, like if you did cardio every day, then you have a greater chance of doing that. You have a much greater chance of running away than you do like picking up a car and hiding under it, right? So consider those practical situations too, that cardiovascular activity actually has more real life benefits, I think, than strength training in general. Like, don't get me wrong, I like to impress the old lady by getting the cat food on the top shelf in the supermarket, but really I could find a lot more situations where running and jumping would probably benefit me more than deadlifting 700 pounds. So consider that. As an aside, I think the training density thing makes a big difference. In other words, doing cardiovascular activity makes lifting weights more enjoyable. It really does. You catch your breath much faster, you recover in between sets more, and when you do cardiovascular activity, it also gives you an opportunity to develop what bodybuilders call a mind-muscle connection, where do I actually use the muscles I want to use when I do the exercise I do? I think we covered that a little bit earlier. Does the exercise I do actually train the thing I want to train? And as a classic example, rowing movements, I think, probably rank as the #1 contributor to like back movements that train the shoulder. In other words, you can have two people doing what looks like a rowing movement, and they emphasize totally different muscle groups. And something like cardiovascular activity, I think, provides a fabulous opportunity for the aspiring bodybuilder or muscle building enthusiast. As you walk on a treadmill, you can really imagine, like, do I use the medial portion of my hamstring when I go into terminal hip? Like, you can actually do my muscles do the things I want them to do while I do it. And so the cardiovascular activity you can really use as a very good bodybuilding tool, more specifically for lower body, but you can imagine your muscles working when you do it, and then you can actually change the emphasis of the muscles you use when walking. And that will actually change on a fundamental level the way you train in the weight room. In other words, something like cardiovascular activity, when done with this sort of intention, can help you flex the muscles you want to flex when you want to flex them for as long as you want to flex them for. And then when you go to lift weights using those muscles, you will get higher quality repetitions out of those movements. At least I share my experience with you, that when I started riding a bicycle every day and I started paying attention to what my legs did, now things like calf raises started to work. When I spent 10 years doing calf raises, doing nothing, I started doing cardio every day and paying attention to what my feet did, and then I translated that to doing calf raises, and now my calves started growing.
Tell us a little bit more about that, because that sounds actually quite exotic to me, the idea of cardio with a certain intentionality actually being beneficial for building muscle. Can you please tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, I can basically iterate what I just recently said, that a component of building muscle, if you want a muscle to grow, you want to use it. And you can do a movement that in principle trains the muscle, but really distributes the load somewhere else. And for instance, if you bench press, then the way that you bench press, you can emphasize your triceps more, your shoulders more, or your chest more. Now, people argue that the position of your joints will end up changing the emphasis, but really you can change the position of your joints a fraction of a degree, and then that translates to massive differences in load. So really, I have a hard time, other than like safety reasons, that it really takes the athlete to determine whether they train the muscle they want to train, unless they have some sort of sensor attached to them. And then that measurement ends up violating NASA. Like that it fits the now and accurate and accessible, but violates simple. So you can attach electrodes to yourself to figure out what muscle you work at any given time, and then a scientist or other practitioners might call that biofeedback. You can see what your body does on an external instrument and then correlate that with your movement. And that gives you a source of positive reinforcement. When the graph makes this shape and you flex your muscle in this way, then you know to flex your muscle that way in the future.
I like that you consider electrodes an accessible thing to have around.
Well, accessible has to do with the nature of displaying the data. So like it will display it in a way that you can immediately see the change in a way that you understand.
Okay, as opposed to conveniently available.
Yeah. So like, do I consider it something you can do every day? Like simple enough to carry? Not really. Some devices exist, but like right now, no. I think some of those devices exist, but that seems overkill, although fun. A fun toy, I suppose. Those sorts of electrodes exist. So you can use any movement you do during the day as an aspiring muscle building person or bodybuilder to really like ask the question, what do my muscles do right now? And with the position I put myself in right now, what muscles do I currently work? What muscles do I feel working? What excess, what deficits? Like, does my body do what I want it to do with the muscles I want to do it with? And the more you lift weights and the more you care about building muscle mass, the more of like a spiritual experience lifting weights becomes in that way, separate from an athletic sort of philosophy where like you want to do a movement perfectly. The bodybuilding or the bodybuilder wants to train the muscle as well as they can. And so what it takes to train a muscle as well as possible can sometimes differ from what it looks like to make it a movement, as to master a movement as much as you can. So getting the best out of a movement tends to mean distributing the load as evenly as you can. When in bodybuilding, you want to distribute the load as specifically as you can. And if you start paying attention to what your body does, again with the self-monitoring thing, then you can figure out with enough reps what positions to put your joints in and how to flex your muscles so that they do what you want them to do. And cardiovascular activity gives an amazing opportunity to do that, because you might get thousands of repetitions in an hour, and every single one of those repetitions gives you an opportunity to ask the question, do my muscles do what I want them to do right now? And from a muscle building standpoint, I think that has tremendous carry.
What kinds of awarenesses does that include on, say, a bike or a treadmill? What kinds of things are you paying attention to?
I think that ends up getting a little bit off course, but I think like if you hop on a bicycle, you can ask yourself the question like, can I just use my calves? Now technically you emphasize the calves, but bear with me here. Like, can I just use my calves to move the pedals? Well, can I just use my hamstring to pull? Can I just use my butt cheek to push? You know, can I just pedal with one leg at a time? Can I use all the muscles at once? And so you can play these games with yourself that really help you use your muscles the way you want to use them. And again, every single repetition on a bicycle gives you that opportunity, and then you just kind of get cardiovascular activity on accident.
Well, just the idea that there's something very cool about voluntary progressive resistance, right? And it manifesting in the form of your body. Like, you can look at somebody and say, that dude has put in his time. That dude's like, his stuff works real good against weight. And there's respect there. You can't buy that.
Yeah, okay, I'll buy it. Yeah, understood. And this also follows into the earlier part of the conversation about what sort of reinforcement you get for doing the movement. Like, people who lift weights to build muscle They give up lifting weights relatively fast. You find other things to derive reinforcement from lifting weights. And for that reason, the most accessible thing, the NASA component, now falls into how strong did I get. So how much weight you have on the bar, I would consider a measurement system that falls within the NASA framework. I see right now, in an accurate way, in a simple way, and in an accessible way, how much weight I lift right now.
Yeah, logbook, right?
Yep. And this makes the muscle building a side effect of measuring the progress in strength training because you get more frequent reinforcement with strength gain.
If you're picking up what I'm putting down and want to learn more about cognitive nutrition so you can finally live the life you deserve, then learn about my Kickstart program by clicking the link in the description box below.